We welcome to the Only Fools and Horses podcast, the creator of Goodnight Sweetheart. So, how's it going?
It's a small word with a lot of things. Life is going all right. Good night, sweetheart. Still sort of exists in many levels. We're working on a stage play of Good Night, Sweetheart. We're possibly going to do a book. We might even do some radio scripts. So um, it's a show which, because of its popularity, although it's a long time since the main show was on. It finished in 1999 with an episode in 2016, a sort of special. Still has a lot of fans, I'm delighted to say.
Yeah,
Is a good show.
yeah, Emily's a big fan, aren't you, Emily?
Yeah, I watched it for the first time like a couple of years ago, and it was really good. I enjoyed it. Like, can't stop watching it.
Well, thank you.
No,
It's usually on some obscure channel.
Did you buy the DVDs, Emily, or was it on the TV?
on the TV, it was on BBC iPlayer, I think it was. It was on something. I remember watching it all because I can't remember what it was on.
It was on one of the streaming services, though.
Yeah,
Well,
And
it's
what
on. I
was,
think it's on. I think it's on iPlayer. Um, I don't think it's been on Yesterday or Heritage or your Nana's favorite TV programs.com yet. Um, But it's still a show. It's a well-remembered show, compared to other shows from the same era.
yeah, it's got a great theme tune as well.
yeah.
It has. Well, of course, that song predates the show by about 50 years. And the reason the show is called that is because when the BBC wanted to make the show, we hadn't even got a title for it. We'd written a script without a title. And the producer phoned up Lawrence and said, "What's it called?" And he said, "Well, I haven't got a title yet." And he looked at the bookshelf where there was a book, one of our research books about wartime music, and the title of the book was Goodnight Sweetheart. And he said, "Well, let's call it Goodnight Sweetheart for the time being until we think of a better title." And we haven't thought of a better title yet.
Still waiting. It's a good title though.
It is a good title. It encapsulates a lot of the spirit of the show.
Yeah, and was it always the idea that obviously going back in time would be the main focus of the show?
Well, the original inspiration for the show was that Lawrence and I were um, just, chatting about, in fact, we're chatting about another show that we were writing, and thinking about where to set a theme. And Lawrence said, for no particular reason, that we were in the East End, we were in Whitechapel, and for no particular reason, he said, um, two streets down there, you'd think it was still in the 1940s. And I said, and I don't know why I said this exactly. I said that that's a show. That's a new show. And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I don't know. But there's a show about there being a street where it's a different time." And then started thinking about it and how it would all work and who would be our, if you like, representative between the present and the past. And we built the whole concept up in a sort of very logical way, because the first thing that I remember talking about was, well, if you could go back to the middle of the war and the middle of the Blitz, um, why would you go back the second time unless you were insane? It's really dangerous. So you had to create a show where there was a character that had a reason to go back, something there that made him feel special. And that pretty quickly meant we were writing a romance. And that was that was the first sort of, if you like, driver of the show, which was that this was someone who was going to feel more fulfilled in the past than he was going to feel in the present, where he was a bit out of his time. He didn't really have a very good job. His wife was doing better than he was. He was struggling with that. And in the past, they all thought he was great. So that was the initial sort of, that's what kicked it all off.
Yeah, it's a great show. And of course, Nicholas Lyndhurst played the lead in the show. Was he always the first choice, or did you have many options?
He was number one on a list of one.
Wow.
So when we came up with it and then we wrote the pilot script, and we realized that he was basically an adulterer. And so he wasn't, a simply lovable character. He was a complex character. So who could play him and retain the audience's sympathy? And we didn't think beyond Nick. I suppose had he not died tragically young, you might have thought of someone like Richard Beckinsale, who had. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't.
Who was in Porridge? Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
He was the co-star of Porridge, and he also had that charm. And of course, Nick was in Porridge. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. I've seen Porridge, but I didn't know he was in it.
He plays Ronnie Barker's son. He's only
Oh,
in a couple of scenes. He's in more. There was a spin-off from Porridge called Going Straight, in
I've
which
seen
Nick.
that.
That
Yeah,
was the last series, wasn't it? I think.
that was a spin-off because Porridge set in the prison and Going Straight was set when he came out of prison.
Hmm.
And Nick was in that, but I think, and I could be wrong, so I'm not going to stake my life on it, but I think he made an appearance, probably just a brief appearance, in Porridge, possibly. But anyway, that's a whole other thing I can get into, because Ronnie Barker was the sort of king of comedy, and Nick learned and would happily say that he learned 90% of his art from Ronnie Barker and 10% of it from David Jason, and David had learned everything from Ronnie Barker because he'd worked everything. Everything comes from Ronnie Barker. That's another story. So we knew we wanted Nick, and we got him. I can tell you how we got him, but we got him.
Yeah, tell us how you got him then. Probably a good story.
That's a really good question. So, well, once we decided we wanted Nick, who, as you may or may not know, has always been a very private individual. So he's not someone who can. We didn't know him, although we've been around the business quite a long time, and we happened, whatever year this was, probably 91. Lawrence and I were at the BAFTAs in the good old days when they gave you dinner. So the BAFTAs now is like you sit in a theatre, and at the end of the BAFTAs now, the losers just bugger off, and the winners were all invited to the dinner, but they don't want to go because they want to go and get drunk. But back then, you had your dinner first, and then you had the awards. So we were on a table with several other nominees. Lawrence and I were nominated for something, and on our table, as it happened, was Nick Lyndhurst's agent, who was there with another one of her clients. And that night we won the BAFTA for Best Comedy. So it was a very good moment to say to Ros Chatto, who was his agent, do you think Nick would like to do a new show? And she said, well, I'll arrange a lunch. So we had lunch with Nick. We told him the idea. He was intrigued by it. He was intrigued by it because it was so unlike Rodney. And I'm sure that if he was being offered work, it was all Rodney work.
Mhm.
And by the time we were talking to him, I think Fools had stopped being a regular series. I think by then it was really just going down to specials. I think that was what was happening. So he was up for a new show. So he said, "But if I like it, I'll do it." And it was always very straightforward with Nick. He was very sort of focused, businesslike. Unlike lots of actors and people, he's a professional, a total professional. He liked it. He did it, and we did 60 odd shows. So getting him, it wasn't tricky, but it was by no means certain. And if we hadn't got him, well, I'm sure someone else would have done it, but I don't know who, and he wouldn't have been as good.
No, I think Nick makes it so much better. Because like you said, his character, like obviously he's cheating on his wife with another woman, but you feel sorry for him at the same time.
Well, we always said that Gary, loves both women,
Yeah.
or at least he thinks he does. And we always resisted the thought that, well, his wife in the present day is a real pain in the arse. And so that's why he falls in love in the past.
Yeah.
He, in other societies, he might have got on perfectly well, where you're allowed to have more than one wife. If he was a Mormon, he'd be laughing. He'd have two wives and probably room for a few more. But there you go. So yes, he had to be sympathetic, but equally, every week he really had to lie and cheat and dodge and weave.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember there was a lot of good scenes in the pub.
Well, the pub, it seemed to us, was the focal point, it still is to a great degree, of British culture, and the more so in the war, and in the East End of London, it really, life revolves around it, and it's a great location to set scenes. We had a fantastic designer on the show, so the look of the show was really good, and I think it didn't. Although it was a studio situation comedy shot on multi-camera, it looked more than that. It looked better than that.
It looks very realistic, like as if he was actually there in the war times. Like obviously it was such a hard time for everybody, but you can see them doing the light, like seeing the light when it's like such a dark time. It was so good.
Well, thank you. I mean, the thing was, he knew more or less how things were going to turn out. So he could go there and say, "Don't worry, it's going to be all right." But it wasn't always all right. It was, obvious reasons. He could bring them little things from our time, and of course, the biggest thing, or other than the basic setup of the show, was that he could claim the ownership of all this wonderful music, and which was something which it was never in the original conception of the show. And one of the things when you write a comedy show, if you're very lucky, then there's a moment quite early on when the characters say things which the writer has no idea the character was going to say. So because we set up that one of the things that put Nick at odds with his wife and her friends was that he didn't like the music she liked. He liked, the old blues and stuff like that. And when he saw a pub piano, he sat down and just, because he thought he was dreaming, wasn't bothered about what he did. He sat down and picked out an Elton John song. And when Phoebe, the barmaid, says, "That's a nice song, where did you learn it?" And he says, "Well, actually, I wrote it." Now, until Gary Sparrow said, "Actually, I wrote it," I didn't know he was going to say that, not on a conscious level. Because when you're writing, you're literally making it up. And then you may say, "Oh, that's good," or "That's not very good," or "That is changing." But as soon as one of us said, on Gary's behalf, "I wrote that," that opened up a huge running sort of strand of the music, the showbiz, Hollywood, all those things. And of course, the fact that Phoebe, the barmaid, thinks, "My God, this is fantastic. This guy's walked into my pub who's been to America and been an extra in the movies and makes up these fantastic songs and can get bananas." I mean, what a guy.
An episode I seem to remember is where he brings back his friend from the office back to the wartime. I thought that was a very funny episode.
Yeah. Well, Ron's his best mate. Ron. It doesn't work with Ron. Ron is a printer, and we realised that for Gary to survive in the past, he'd need papers. He'd need an ID and ration card and stuff. So we set up that Ron was a printer. It's obviously he's not the most sort of brilliant scheme, but necessary. So Ron's the printer. Once he's persuaded Ron that he can go back, Ron becomes obsessed with going back. He's also obsessed with making money in the past. So, Gary, if I give you some names of companies that were just starting up then, can you invest in them? Because 70 years later, I'll be rich. And Gary does have a go at that. So on more than one occasion, Ron tries to go back. He does eventually manage to stumble into the past. I can't honestly remember what happens. Sorry. And part of the reason for that, of course, is that Lawrence and I only wrote, let's say, a third of the shows. We had a writing team, and that one was not written by us. So I can't remember what happened. You probably can. I can remember what happened when he went back into the past, when he thought he was following Gary, but he just ended up still in the present looking like a twat because he had like a 1940s suit on.
I think it was the last few episodes, if I remember, before it gets shut. Like, I think it gets shut, doesn't it? Like the alleyway.
At the very end.
Yeah, I think it's like an episode before where he actually gets in.
The very last episode, he gets stuck in the past.
Yeah.
And we'd never thought of how it was going to end. We sort of knew, rightly or wrongly, that if we were going to follow the course of the Second World War, which was 6 years, well, we could do 6 series, and each series would deal with the year of the war.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about a time, the 1990s, when Lawrence and I had about 4 shows in production at the same time, and we were always juggling shows. And so, a bit like a bloke with 2 girlfriends, as soon as you got a new one, you're thinking, well, at some stage, you're going to have to get rid of her to get another new one. Not very good thinking. So, I look back and think, what on earth were we doing thinking about we'll stop the show at a given time rather than saying we'll keep going until the public get tired of it. So when we came to do what we thought would be the last year, we just needed to think, what happens? How does it finish? So we thought, well, if he saves someone's life, and then finds himself stuck in the past, then you can say, oh, the whole series, the whole 6 years, basically was he's been sent by fate or God or whatever you want to call it for this ultimate purpose, and then he gets stuck in the past. And it wasn't the best imaginable ending, but it's the best imaginable ending we could lay our hands on at that time. And then, as you may know, in 2016, we were asked to do to revive it. The BBC were doing a number of tributes to classic comedy, and we brought. And in 2016, we found a way to bring him back again, which I thought was quite good fun. And it was a good show. It was a well-received show, but unfortunately, BBC decided they didn't want to do a series of it, which was very extremely annoying, because we had the whole cast and they were really up for it. Nick was very up for it.
Yeah, that was a shame because, as you mentioned, lots of people really enjoyed it, didn't they?
They did.
Back.
They did. And Nick, as I said, is quite a private guy. And when he came back, in 2016, and we got the cast together, he was made up. He was happy as Larry, and it was a lovely, lovely experience. Because it was a one-off and it was made on a tight budget. I think one or two of the sets are terrible, but that's another thing. If the BBC had said, "Oh, we like this, we're going to make a series," we would have to say, "But only if you give us money to reshoot that terrible scene in the car in the telephone shop where the whole set looks like it costs 3 and 9 pence halfpenny." It was embarrassing. But other than that, it was great, and so much so that made us think, well, maybe we'll do something in another medium, because we had a lot of good ideas for it. And Nick was great to work with. And one of his real talents, and I know you're big fans of his, which is true both in Fools and in our show, is he doesn't do very much. He can convey enormous emotion with almost no change of his expression. It's almost like he belongs to the sort of tradition of Buster Keaton. He's got that sort of ability to convey a lot whilst doing very little. He's got great charm, but he knows, and again, because he's learned from the best, that when you're on TV, when you're like that, it's all about how little you can do, not how much you can do. And this is one of the reasons why, for me, I don't like how so much comedy now on TV stars stand-ups rather than actors, because acting is a real skill to be honed and learnt and developed, and you can be the toast of Edinburgh, but you haven't learnt that. Some people do learn that skill, but a lot of TV comedy is very shouty because it's not actors. David Jason. I mean, David Jason is quite extreme. I've been with David Jason, admittedly 40 or 50 years ago when I first met him, when he would do anything for a laugh. I've seen him lean back in his chair in a restaurant until it fell over just to get a laugh off a waiter. And that was when he was number one in the ratings. He still would rather get a laugh off a waiter if he could. Wow. But if you said to David, "Where does it all come from?" he'd say, "Ronnie. It all comes from Ronnie."
Ronnie was the best.
He was. Because David Jason, as I'm sure you know everything about David Jason, he was with Ronnie Barker in Porridge. He was with Ronnie Barker in a lot of his early stuff, Fattock's End.
Open All Hours.
Yeah. Open on exactly open hours, of course. In fact, I think rather oddly, and I love David, that when they revised Open All Hours, he stopped playing himself and started playing Ronnie Barker.
Yeah.
Because Ronnie Barker's shadow is so immense. But Nick was quite something. I mean, firstly because Rodders, was such a incredible character, you know. And people used to shout Rodders at him. He'd been doing Gaucho for 4 years, and people shouted Rodders at him. He didn't respond. And in fact, you know, if Nick came out of his front door and there was an autograph hunter there, he'd pull his cap down over his eyes and just walk and walk and walk and walk until the autograph hunter gave up. Because for him, he's got his life and he's got his work.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
It can be hard to separate the two, can't it, sometimes?
Well, he does. He's determined, you know.
Yeah.
He's not rude, but he says, I'm not on duty now.
Yeah. He's playing
Yeah.
a part, isn't he?
Yeah, I'm not on duty.
He
I'm
is
just going
Nicholas
out of the house.
Lyndhurst.
Go to the house. I'm just going up the shops. No, I'm not giving you an autograph. But and of course, he's a very stubborn character, so he'll put himself out more. And I'm going back in the day, but you know, but so I've worked with, you know, of all the people I've worked with, he is unique in the degree to which he seems to me to be self-contained and really, you know, and like all the best comedy actors, he's an actor.
Yeah.
First and foremost, he's an actor. And he's done nastier parts, like, you know, in Charles Dickens, he played, I can't remember the character's name, you know what I mean, though, in David Copperfield.
Yeah.
And you know, I'd cast him as, you know, an evil murderer in a drama.
Mm-hmm.
And he would be fantastic. You know, he's a proper actor.
A lot like
Go on.
Roger Lloyd Pack. I mean, have you seen him in some totally different roles? I
Oh
saw
yeah,
him
well
as a
he's,
murderer once, and he
of
was
course,
completely convincing.
of course. And in what I, you know, would be old fashioned enough to call the golden age of comedy, when there were 3 or 4 comedies on, you know, any given week, every night on ITV, there'd be at least one comedy, and some nights there'd be 2 comedies. They were largely actors. So when we, just to go off piece for a bit, when we did Birds of a Feather and said to the BBC, we want Linda Robson, Pauline Quirke, does it bother you they're not stars? And the guy said, no, they're good actors.
Mm.
I think that's to be honest, in a lot of media, it's like that now. It's like if you listen to the radio, it's more so-called celebrities, isn't it? Or so-called people who are famous. It's not necessarily, are they good on the radio? Or, you know, it can be like that sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, you know, there are, I was just checking, I thought I had an email from Lawrence. I haven't. He's probably still trying to get on. I mean, I love comedy in all its forms, and I think there are people who can work across the whole thing. You know, we worked with Rick Mail, and Rick Mail was extraordinary talent.
Lovely.
The exact opposite of Nick Lyndhurst. If Rick Mail came out of his house and there weren't the autograph hunters, he'd go and find some. You know, he loved all that side of it.
I loved Bond. That was a great show.
But he could play serious, but you know, so I mean, basically, talent is a mysterious thing. You know, talent is a mysterious thing, and when you write a script, you sit in a room the first time with the actors, and you read and you hear the script read, and sometimes, you know, around that table, you know, there are people who will knock your socks off. Nick wasn't one of them. Nick doesn't like to give anything away at a read through. He doesn't want to do anything that you might make him commit himself to. So he gives you absolutely like deadpan reading, and you think, what's he playing at? Because he's playing, and someone else will give you the whole act, and you think that's fantastic. And then when you come to make the show a week later, they're still doing the same thing they did a week ago, and you're saying, "Oh, can you just change it up a bit?" So, but you know, he was enjoyed to work with him, and you know, we worked with him again, and we'd work with him again at the drop of a hat.
Great. It's been lovely to have you on the podcast. It's been great speaking to you, and thanks
it's very
for
nice
such a great
meeting
show.
you. Thank you very much. Good. Good luck with Fools and Horses. I imagine there's enough there to keep you going for the next 10 years.
Yes, we'll
Oh
see.
yeah, we've been doing it since the lockdown, so yeah, it's been great.
Well, good for you. I apologise for Lawrence. I expect he's still trying to get online.
That's okay. You told
I'm
us
rude.
Oh,
plenty, so that was
oh,
great.
he
Thank you
could
very
be.
much.
He could have gone through a time portal. It's
It
quite
could have.
possible.
Yeah.
If you knew him like I knew him, you would know that was not as unlikely as all that. Last night we stopped for petrol on the way back from London. He went in to get a Kit Kat and came back and got into someone else's car
Oh,
and parked at the next pump. And the guy who owned the car came out and gave him like a really hard stare as he scrambled out of the bloke's passenger seat. And I said to Lawrence, "We're in Harlesden. This is not a good place to get into the wrong BMW. I don't want to go home and tell your wife you've been shot for a Mars bar." So, so if you tell me he's in the wrong car, quite possible. Anyway, good luck with it.